now that your friends have gone.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another fucking writing podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Dempsey. So I was out at work the other day, and so if you don't know, I'm a backcountry ranger. It's pretty interesting. I'm just out there alone a lot, hiking around, camping, stuff like that. And I will often come onto cultural signs of the ancestral Puebloans, or otherwise known as Anasazi people, when I'm out moving around. And it's really interesting to me. You know, they tend to be in these spots that just sort of draw you in naturally. They also seem to be at crossroads. So basically the point is they're in places where you're going to find them. And it made me just think about how we as a species, you know, we haven't really changed much in certain ways. And, you know, we'll always move in a similar way to those who came before us. And we are a migratory species, but so much of where we migrate is dictated by geography. And so we end up filtering into the same places again and again and again. And anyways, so I run across this pictograph and petroglyph panel, and I had this just crazy series of emotions where I get to this panel. It's always a cool thing, always an experience. And I see this, you know, modern graffiti. Somebody's written like "Dawn was here" or some shit right across this image that could be, you know, 800 years old or something. He literally just scratched it right into there. Like, and it's interesting how fired up it made me. And then I'm wandering around some more and just sort of dwelling on it. And why do I feel this way? Really? Like, the original writer put that there knowing others would come. It was put there to be seen. And that got me thinking about, like, memories and how they, you know, we tend to only think about memories as living in our brain. Like, that's where they're stored, right? But man, if you've ever loved a place or a person, you realize that you can feel it elsewhere. You don't feel the memory of them in your brain. I really do think we store memories all over our bodies, kind of like, I think about it like a record, like a wax record. And as we live, we get these grooves inside of us that are kind of like our song. And it's just cool to think about how we are creating these songs and they overlap with the same grooves and movements as others around us. And that's how we harmonize with one another and kind of how we connect. And it rewrote my emotions in that moment. I was like, you know, Don or whoever the hell, what he was doing really wasn't that different than what people had always been doing in that spot. And there's a reason why people stumbled on it back then, and there's a reason why they will continue to stumble on it. And then that led to thinking about there are certain images that show up again and again in these different rock writings. And some of them are, you know, bighorn sheep and lizards. But then something else you see a lot in this area are handprints. You'll come into like an alcove or a cave, and the whole wall will be covered in various sizes and colors, sometimes right on top of one another. It's a really striking image. And I was talking to a friend not too long ago, and she was telling me about this. She just sat at home and had this mushroom trip, and kind of as everything was coming on, she said she was looking around her apartment and all she saw were hands, meaning like literally anything she could put her eyes on was made by hands in some way or another. And if you've ever had any kind of like a psychotropic experience, you realize that like that's a big part of it, you know, it's this like you feel a part of a larger whole. And, you know, usually when you are hearing someone else's trip, you're kind of like, oh, that's very interesting. But actually, it's not interesting at all to just hear about it. You know, you got to experience it. But with hers, it was kind of different. Like I almost had like an epiphany or like a religious experience just listening to that. And I immediately thought of these images in the caves. Today on the podcast, I talked to Claire Hopple. Claire is the author of Echo Chamber, It's Hard to Say, Tired People Seeing America, etc., etc. I'm a big fan of Claire's. I have been for a long time, and I'm really excited to have her on the show. Let's get to it.
Yeah, I'm a hiker. I don't do anything else. I'm like the clumsiest person you've ever met. So I just feel like regular, walking along. But I do love to do that. That's the plan tomorrow. So
cool. Yeah, I went to Asheville. Gosh, it was probably like 2010 or something like that. How long have you been there for?
Like 6 years, I think.
All right.
Close. Maybe like 5.5 or something.
Quite a while. Okay, right on. It's a funky little place. I liked it.
I feel like it's getting better and better too. Like it's not very diverse, but it's slowly becoming more diverse and
happy to hear that. Yeah. So it's
still pitiful, but it's getting there.
No, yeah. Totally. I had a similar like feel and experience. I lived in Missoula for a little while.
Okay.
And it's like one of those spots that really the geography and the surroundings really get to you in a way that I could totally see Asheville being similar. It's just like, wow, this place is really cool. It's got that like kind of like hug you effect because there's like mountains, but they're not so huge that they make you feel insignificant. It's more of like this is just a comfortable place. But man, the amount of just like white people in Subarus was outrageous. Like,
thank you.
Yeah, everyone wears the same. Yeah, everyone wears the same clothes and like, yeah. I don't know. How do you feel living in a place like that? Do you feel creative? Do you feel like stymied in any way in creativity?
No, I do feel like I don't know. There's something about it. I've always just wanted to be here ever since I knew it existed. There's just some kind of pull. That's a good question about creativity, though. I don't know if it affects me one way or the other as far as that goes. If anything, it's probably in a positive way, but yeah.
I do want to eventually get into, you said Asheville has like a pull or like a magnetism. And I really am interested in learning kind of the backstory of how you ended up there and why and everything else. But I'm also super interested. So I was doing my little like snooping research. And I think today might have been the first time I realized you're from PA originally.
Yes.
Yeah. So can you like talk a little bit about back then and just like what atmosphere you grew up in? Were you in like a big city, small town? Do you have like intellectual parents? Do you have siblings? Were you like writing back then? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Introduce me to your early life, I guess.
Totally. I grew up in the woods, basically, outside of Pittsburgh. Like I just say I'm from Pittsburgh because people have never actually heard of where I'm from. But it's about 45 minutes from downtown. But yeah, so my childhood, my parents moved there because of the great public school system. So I had a great education. I didn't really necessarily care about school until I was much older, but because I was just in a good environment and surrounded by people who cared, I think I ended up doing better just because of that. But I was just like in my own little dream world the whole time. And
were you like a solitary kid?
I had a best friend my whole way up, like from age 4 on. So I was either solitary or with her, and she was. I mean, we're still kindred. Like we would be whittling sticks with our Swiss Army knives in the woods, or playing in the crick, or like playing we call it figures, where it's just like a bunch of toys you just dump out on the floor and like you create this narrative with it, you know. and or writing stories. So all of the above, really. So it was a great time. I feel very fortunate that I had that experience because it was a good place to grow up, and I don't think I would necessarily want to live there as an adult, but it was awesome as a kid.
Okay. And did you have siblings?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't answer that part. Yes, I have an older sister who's just a little bit under 2 years older than me.
You mentioned you weren't really that interested in school. Could you elaborate on that at all? Was it just because you were like, you had a fulfilling time away from there, and so it didn't feel like anything that was necessary? You didn't like when I was a kid, I kind of liked school just because it got me away from home for a little portion of the day, but maybe you didn't feel that way.
Yeah, no, I liked being at school. I think I just meant that in the way that like I wasn't serious about academics and learning. I think I just accidentally picked up some things just because I was in a good environment. But most of the time I was just like in my own little dream world. People call it Claire Bear Land.
Okay.
I'm still there.
Yeah, totally. So would you like attribute that kind of side of you as being integrally linked to your creative side?
For sure. Yeah, there's no question. I mean, people always say like creativity, you need space and time and the freedom to be creative. And I feel like I had that and I just ran wild with it.
Does it feel similar to the place that you go now when you're writing, as far as just mental space goes?
That's a great question. Yeah. I haven't really connected it like that before. That's pretty insightful, Tyler. But yeah, I think I just get in what they call the flow, where you just shut everything out, like you're saying, and just focus on the one thing in front of you.
Totally. So did you eventually, say in like high school, start to look more seriously at education? Did you go to college for anything?
Yeah, I actually got my master's too.
Holy shit. Yeah.
I laugh because it's just kind of like, I never in my life expected that. But yeah, I have a master's in counseling. So I used to be a therapist. Now I'm just in marketing. I'm a content strategist. So I get to write and edit and brainstorm for work. I don't get to read at work. I wish.
Yeah, right. Yeah, all of us.
Everyone wishes that.
Yeah, totally. When, in your mind, did you become a writer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in some ways I still don't feel like a writer. And then in other ways I feel like I always have been, if that makes sense. Ever since I learned how to form letters on a page, I've been writing stories. With the exception of adolescence, I kind of stepped away from it. My brain, imploded on itself or whatever happens.
In adolescence, totally.
Yes. And so that from 13 to 20, maybe age 20 or something, I wasn't really into that. But then it was kind of like my life just sort of bookended as far as like my temperament and personality and stuff. I just got back to where I was before and picked right.
Yeah. So maybe in your early 20s, were you getting any kind of support or encouragement from outside sources, or just kind of internally something clicked?
I think in undergrad, I was a psych major, but an English minor. And I started reading some things that got me really interested in writing again. It's all about what you're reading, right? I mean, I feel like that's the case. And so I felt more inspired and I started taking a few writing workshops in college. And I think that really pulled me back in.
What were some of those first books that really got you interested?
I think the one that really sticks out to me is Lori Moore's Self-Help and Anagrams too. I think both of those, I was like, what is this? This is incredible.
Yeah. How and when did you get more into indie lit? Like when did all that transpire?
I haven't really thought much about that. I think just starting to submit to journals and I don't know.
I kind of track what you read, Claire. You read some weird shit.
I do. I really do.
How do you find this stuff? Or like, what led you to this kind of outsider writing?
Yeah, I would pick up. I used to pick up just like best American short stories and like discover authors that way. Or I think just over time I would find people, whether it's on through a journal or something like that, and then I would just keep exploring, keep reading, and then I accidentally found myself on the outskirts of everything that most people read and being really disappointed by anything that's like New York Times bestseller or anything anyone else is talking about. I'm like, what is this? Or even writers who have these incredible short stories, but then they maybe write this novel that is marketable. And then I read that and I'm like super disappointed with that. So I've ended up just having like favorite writers, but also favorite presses, indie presses, like you're saying, that I know like won't really disappoint me.
And so was it you pursuing education that took you to Asheville?
So my husband grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, and that's about an hour away. And as we've moved all over the place, but we would go see his parents, and every time I would want to stop in Asheville, and I would want to stay a little longer every time. But back, over a decade ago, you couldn't really find a job here unless you were in hospitality or you had a trust fund and you just wanted to paint in the River Arts District. You really couldn't find a job, especially if you didn't already live here. So it just took a little time to get here. That's how I just got.
Cool. What do you think tugged you in, I guess? Like, what were you feeling each time that you didn't want to leave?
I can't really explain it. I mean, I can sort of explain it. Like the mountains, obviously, just the flora and fauna. Like, I mean, I love the bears and the rhododendron tunnels here on all the trails and the food. And I love cities that you can grasp in a weekend.
Yeah.
The big cities kind of overwhelm me. But if I feel like, oh, this neighborhood or this corner or whatever, like if I can get my hands around it, then I feel more comfortable.
Totally. Yeah. You could like bike around Asheville in a weekend. I feel like,
It's a small town.
It is. Is there any kind of like a palpable writing scene there that you've found? Yeah,
I think I mean, just like a lot of writers, I am bad about just being an introvert and just kind of staying in my house and not getting out there. But there's a burgeoning one and probably an existing one that I just haven't been a part of really too. But Talking Book is here. I don't know if you're
familiar.
Yeah,
yep.
Love them. So it's great to have them around. And then just down the street, this venue called Story Parlor just opened up, and they do workshops and they host events. And I've done one reading there. And also just the book people here are amazing. Like the booksellers have been great advocates and friends. So that's been super refreshing. I was a little intimidated by Malaprop's, our local bookstore at first, but they're all the sweetest people I've ever met.
That's awesome. It makes me happy to hear. Cool. So shifting over to your writing is very hard to label. For me, it's short for the most part.
Yeah.
I'd say there's a lot of it is unexpectedly weird.
Yeah.
I guess. And it might just be me, but I get like Edgar Carrot kind of vibes out of it. Don't know if you've read him at all.
Should I read him?
You should. I'll set you up with some books after this for sure. And it makes total sense to me that you really, really like you straddle conventional and estranged publishers. Like you really can kind of like sneak into different niches, even though you don't necessarily neatly fit into anything in my mind, I guess. So yeah, I guess like who are your biggest influences now? And this may be like super difficult to put into words, and that's okay if you can't. But what does the creative act look like when you're actually in it? Do do your stories just come to you all weird like that? Or are you feeling almost like you're collaging different ideas together?
That's a great way to put it. Definitely feel like I'm collaging. So I'll back up and answer your first question. Influences are, as you might imagine, all over the place, but the people that stick out to me in this very moment are Amelia Gray, Renee Gladman, Scott McClanahan, and Sam Pink. I mean, I could go on for a long time, but those are the ones that pop up at the front of my brain right now and have stayed with me for quite some time. I could probably just look behind me too.
Right. Cool. But yeah, a little bit into the creative side. You said it seemed like maybe something of that collaging struck you.
I feel like just reading stuff that's inspiring, you get ideas. And so I'm always writing down bullet points of ideas just whenever, whether it's when I'm reading or traveling or have a moment to think. Again, going back to that, giving yourself space for that, which I'm bad about doing. But yeah, so writing down bullet points of ideas until you feel like you have something, or you just have way too many bullet points that you're starting to get overwhelmed by, and turning that into something. I am a big note card person, so I just write them all out on note cards, and then I try and make them into something, move them all around, and
interesting.
order them if I can.
Yeah. No, this makes your writing make so much more sense to me in my head hearing that.
You can see it all play out.
Yeah. It's like mad scientist. So it's interesting that you mentioned that you find it difficult maybe to set aside that time now to go into that creative space and to just find some solitude to work. And at the same time, you've been on a streak since like 2017. You've been dropping almost like a book a year, which is insane to me. And I'm like, did you have a lot of stuff kind of sitting around in your back pocket and then suddenly started placing a lot of it? Are you just the exact opposite of me and you're like just producing stuff all the time? Like,
maybe a little bit of both. So my first book, it was several years in the making, and it was like just all the stories I had that I actually didn't hate and making them into something. And so that one was it took much longer to get into an actual book. And then after that, writing is like a compulsion for me. I have tried to quit before and I can't. So I've just accepted it as a part of how I need to live, no matter how inconvenient it might be. And I do love it. I don't want to make it sound like it's work. I hate when people complain about writing. It's like,
me too.
Right. Like, if you don't like it, just don't do it. Right. Mm-hmm. I love it. But it can be, emotional, and you can put too much of your identity into it or not at all, or all over the place.
And it takes a hell of a lot of time. Like I totally understand. I've wanted to quit it too. Like it would many parts of my life would be so much easier if I could let it go. Mm-hmm.
It's like, I could be helping people over here instead, or like,
yeah.
Does that mean that you feel the same way about, like, it feels like a compulsion for you?
Yeah, it's like a thing that, it builds and builds. Like it's almost like all of the creation is first off taking place in some sub chamber of my brain, and it's almost outside of my consciousness, and it's always moving, and it's always trying to like place things together, or maybe it's just this thing that I have to purge every now and again, and I can rest, or something similar to resting, for a short amount of time after it's done, and then very quickly it comes back. So
yeah.
Cool. What, and maybe you don't have something like this, but was there like a single most helpful thing that's propelled your writing? Like anything you've learned, or just it clicked after something and you kind of leveled up, or things just got smoother?
I've honestly tried to shut out any kind of advice, because I feel like writing is so personal, and it just, I don't know. I've heard some writing advice out there, and then it never really added up. And then the next day people are like, yeah, don't ever believe that. So like, I think if anything, the answer would be just to shut out anybody who seems like they have the answers.
They know. Yeah. I like it.
I think the best teaching is just reading.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did Echo Chamber come together? Your new book. What was the process like with Trident, and how's it been going?
Echo Chamber is my most bizarre book to date. People keep calling it absurdist, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I guess you're right. I don't know. I just was having so much fun letting this character just do whatever she wanted to do and just see where it led. It was very therapeutic to write, and she really does just do whatever she wants to do.
Yeah.
So it was really fun, and it just, I guess I'm mostly talking about the novella when I say that, but yeah, there are stories in there too that I'm excited about. And Trident has been really great. Nate, I've been talking to, he's like the primary contact there. And I've been very pleased with the whole process so far. And I've been meaning to say that in a more public way, like a social media kind of way. So, thank you for giving me an opportunity to say.
Yeah, shout out to Nate.
Really appreciate Trident and Nate and everything that they've done to make this happen. So
you may have answered another question unknowingly that I had, which was kind of like, if you were forced to throw away the entire book except one piece out of it, what would you save and why?
Oh, that is so, I don't know. I mean, I guess in a sense, you're right. Like the novella would make the most sense. It's the most cohesive and it's the longest. And it really is like the heart of it. But there are a couple stories in there that I feel like are even wilder than the novella. I mean, so basically I was reading Mark Balmer. I don't know if you're familiar. Yeah, I figured you would be. And I'm so inspired by his writing and just devastated that he's not with us. And I was reading the book that Fence put out of like his posthumous works, and I was on vacation. And between being on vacation and reading Mark, it was like the perfect storm of just my brain just exploded basically with idea. And so I ended up writing about a guy who thinks that he is a dinosaur-shaped chicken nugget. And just what that would look like for his family for him to be convinced of that and how they deal with it. So I think that one in particular says a lot about the book itself.
Yeah, it captures that time in your head and sort of what was going on, I guess, creatively. I wonder if you mentioned having this character and just kind of chasing her down and seeing where she led you. Did you get any feels in creating the novella that was like, ooh, I could do this for a long time? Like create like a longer book, novel, whatever. Or was that enough? Did you like?
I felt like this is the end for I don't know. That was as long as I could make that and not feel like I was forcing it to be something it wasn't. But I am currently writing what I think is actually like a traditional novel, or as close as I'll ever come to that. I just think I have a short attention span and I don't have the brain for the world building that it takes for something super long.
Yeah. I would not expect you to create something conventional either, even if you did something.
And it's not conventional in, it's very similar to my other writing. It's just maybe a longer form of that, kind of like what you're talking about.
Okay, cool.
I don't know if we could say conventional, just maybe slightly more conventional length. Yeah. And it's very early stages, so it might not even be that.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, I won't press you for any other questions about the book then, but I hope to read it someday. What you've published a number of books now, and you've always published with a different press, right? You've never
Yes.
doubled down on. Okay. With that experience under your belt, how do you feel now about indie publishing? Has mostly the experience with each press been really positive? It's gone in a way that you can be happy with? Have you faced any disappointments?
I think for the most part, it's been good, but I only know what I've experienced in a sense. So it's hard. That's, I think, part of why I go with a different press each time is if I can. I mean, who knows if people will continue to accept my work, but I want to see how other people do it and what their process is like. And I do think each one has been very different in its approach. And it's like, ooh, I really like how this one did that and this one did that kind of thing. But overall, it's a really great community to be a part of. And I've learned a lot and I think it's always good as people are trying to submit books that they just talk to other people who have published with the presses. And I mean, it seems really obvious, but if someone is concerned or just curious about how things work, I think that's a great way to kind of peek behind the scenes without actually.
Yeah. You see how many gears are turning underneath it all, and I really appreciate that too. You make me think about authors like Bud Smith, who, started out very much with these indie presses, and now they're kind of releasing some books, and who knows if he'll go back to indie sometime in like slightly larger press, like Random House or something like that. And with your comment earlier about like not really often being turned on by books that are on like the New York's top 5 bestseller list or whatever, are you trepidatious at all about trying to move your books into realms like that? Or like, what would you feel if someone like that approached you about publishing a book?
I would feel very surprised.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, have you read anything about that? No,
yeah, right.
I mean, I'm certainly open to all kinds of possibilities, and I do hope to, get a wider audience each time. Whether or not that's actually possible, it's still something to always hope for. But at the same time, I fully recognize that being marketable is not my concern, not my primary concern, or really a concern of mine at all. Whatever comes out, that's what comes out. And so if people appreciate that, that's awesome. And if they don't, I understand.
Yeah. No, it seems to harmonize very much with your, like, it's a compulsion. You do it because you have to. It's not it's end result.
Yeah, it's totally therapy for me, and I hope for others. I think all art is trying to make people relate to one another and feel less alone and all of that. So that is always the goal. And there are other weird people out there, and they want to feel understood.
Yeah, I do. Okay, so we're almost done. We're almost out of time. I guess my last question is, what gives you hope?
Just any kind of.
Just in general. Yeah. What things in your life, even if they're little things, fill you with a sense of hope, or just?
I think just feeling more settled here in Asheville and like building a community and like trying to love people well in an age where a lot of people are just like, well, that person, is weird or doesn't like you or whatever, or said something to you. Well, cut them off. And it's like, well, what does it look like to just dig in and actually be real with people and commit and serve and not let go and all of that instead. So I think that is giving me hope right now.
I love it. Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you, Tyler.
That was my talk with Claire. If you enjoyed our chat, I really hope you'll go over and pick up her book, her new book, out through Trident Press, Echo Chamber. It's a wonderful book. I blurbed it, not just because we're friends, but because I liked it. And truly, truly think that she's a great writer, one to constantly enjoy and keep an eye on, too. I also hope that if you enjoyed this, you will consider giving this a like or thumbs up or subscribe or tell a friend about this podcast. We're small. Just word of mouth goes a long, long way. There's also the option you can find in the show notes, the link to my Patreon page. It would mean so much if you were to go over there and support me in that way. You can start out for as little as $1 a month. That's just kind of like you're cheerleading me on, saying thank you or good job or keep going. And there's also a $5 option. And with that one, you actually, you can watch these talks. It's like the raw videos. So you get to see our back and forth in real time. You can see our faces, our reactions. Yeah. You also get a handwritten letter of thanks from me. And I send you books from people I interview on this podcast. So if that is a possibility for you, I really, really would appreciate you considering it. All right. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.